I've been living in New York for almost 25 years now. Incredibly, I find that hard to believe, but it's true. And I've always lived in Brooklyn exclusively. The New York in trust is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. What attracted me as a Brooklynite too was the fact that one of the central characters is the daughter of an Italian immigrant whose father is this anarchist, very high-principled, and they have a hard time. It's the 30s. They live in Brooklyn, and I was very attracted by this notion that virtually from their home they could see the Wall Street skyline, and how radically different those worlds on either side of the river were at the time. On one side you had a wealth unknown up to that point in human history, opulence and modernity at its on steroids, and on the other side of the river you had like blood traction, horses and people living in pre-modern conditions and utter squalor. It was very, very visible, that gap on either side of the river, and that is something that I found very interesting. Also, being an immigrant in New York myself, and I'm sort of a comfortable immigrant. I came here with a grant to like pursue a PhD. It was I'm not far from me to claim the terrible stories we'll hear about immigration for myself, but technically I am an immigrant, so I have been all my life, having grown up in Sweden and such, and then going back to a country that was supposed to be mine but didn't feel like mine. So this migrant experience was very important to me, and I wanted to make sure to include it in the book, also because talking about New York, writing about New York without talking about immigration is just missing the point altogether, because everyone here, from the Dutch onward, has been an immigrant, or sadly they have been slaughtered or completely excluded, from what this city ultimately became. So this part of New York was for me very important to talk about this triangulation between Brooklyn, downtown Manhattan, and then the Upper East Side, which is where one of the protagonists live. This triangulation is where the novel takes place. In my work, I like to address stereotypes and commonplaces. That is something that always interests me. These highly fossilized and ossified tropes, and I like taking them and subverting them. Within the Distance, it was a bunch of tropes about the American West, and here it's about this highly iconic era in American history, which is the 20s and 30s, and I think that New York is an emblem of that, is sort of is a topographical kind of manifestation of. Think about it. The nickname of the state is the Empire State. We don't pause enough to reflect on how appalling and terrible that is. The Empire State. So this is something I absolutely wanted to address in the book. But the trick too was a great part of the book revolves around wealth. And what I find in the literature, American literature that I've read about wealth, is that even those books that set out to critique this accumulation of capital end up bedazzled by the very thing they set out to address, right? They become enmeshed and kind of in the description of luxury goods and conspicuous consumption. So I was very aware of that at all times writing the book, and that was a big. It was a big challenge. How do I convey this idea of opulence while not falling into that trap of being totally bewildered and fascinated by the very thing that I'm trying to question?